Have you ever wondered what made our digital world possible? Have you thought about how smartphones in our pockets are more powerful than the computers that used to fill entire rooms 70 years ago? And what is the secret of this tiny invention, no bigger than a grain of sand, that changed the way we live forever? In this video, we will dive together into the journey of the transistor, from the first spark in a small laboratory in 1947 to smartphones and artificial intelligence in 2025. We will discover how a small idea turned into a force that changed the world, how ambitious minds managed to overcome the impossible, and what makes the transistor today the heart of the digital revolution. Was the transistor just a computing tool, or is it the silent pulse that drives our daily lives? Follow us to learn the full story, from vacuum tubes to silicon chips, and all the way to quantum computing. Imagine yourself in a narrow laboratory filled with evacuated glass tubes and glowing wires, where the faint hum of electric currents creates a strange symphony as if the heart of a newborn city were pulsing in silence. This was the world of the 1940s, an era of war and restless invention, when modern computers were nothing but distant dreams, and humanity's control over electricity was still in its infancy. At that time, vacuum tubes were the heart of every electronic device, massive, heavy giants made of glass and steel. They consumed enormous power, needed hours to heat up, and shattered at the slightest mistake. Yet they were humanity's only gateway to controlling the flow of electrons through a delicate glass void. But they were a burden, a ceiling that limited every dream of a digital revolution. In the midst of this technological darkness, hope was born inside Bell Laboratories, where three brilliant minds gathered: William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Brattain. Three scientists, different in temperament and vision, united by a single dream to find a small, light, and efficient replacement for those glass monsters. A simple idea, but impossible to achieve. Days of failed experiments passed, papers filled with equations and crossed-out sketches, and sleepless eyes that refused to give up. Tension filled the room between Shockley, who saw himself as the project's leader, and Bardeen and Brattain, who searched for a new path forward. Then, unexpectedly, came the spark, not from a wire, but from an idea that said, controlling electrons doesn't require a vacuum, but rather a semiconducting material capable of guiding current precisely as the human mind desires. That moment marked the birth of the transistor. On December 16, 1947, history was rewritten. Upon a small wooden table, with trembling hands and racing hearts, the trio succeeded in making a tiny piece of germanium control electrical current with unprecedented precision. That modest fragment held within it the seed of the modern world. The three scientists had created a small device that would change the course of human history and ignite the digital revolution. Because of it, the computer was born, then the telephone, then satellites and artificial intelligence. Everything we see in today's technology traces back to that first spark in a cluttered laboratory in 1947. Yet the story did not end there. The transistor, despite its brilliance, opened the door to even greater questions. How could it be mass-produced? How could it be made smaller, small enough to live inside every device on Earth? Those questions became the fuel for decades of innovation, paving the way for Silicon Valley and the age of information we live in today. And so the journey began, from the darkness of laboratories to the light of screens, from glass tubes to silicon chips, from that first spark to a connected world. A journey proving that the greatest revolutions begin with a single sparker in a mind that refuses to accept limits. The three minds, Bardeen, Brattain, and Shockley in the depths of Bell Laboratories, ideas collided like stars crashing in a distant galaxy. Three men, three great minds, and three different visions for the same goal: to find a replacement for the vacuum tube. John Bardeen, the rebellious genius, was quick-witted, always searching for breakthroughs that could defy every scientific barrier. Walter Brattain, the quiet and precise one, was an analytical mind, able to see the tiny details others overlooked, weaving equations together in a way that seemed almost magical. As for William Shockley, the team's leader, he was a blend of brilliance and determination, a man who believed that the goal justified any means, and that success required discipline and strong leadership. The walls were covered with diagrams, and the air was thick with the scent of coffee and failed experiments. Each failure created an immense emotional tension. The conflicts among the scientists were not merely personal disagreements, but a struggle between different visions of science itself. Should they aim for a quick solution, or seek a kind of lasting innovation that could truly change the world? In those critical moments, the idea of the transistor began to take shape. It was like a delicate dance between electrons and holes inside semiconducting materials, a small movement here, a gap there, and the flow of current turned into a magical switch capable of controlling information. But turning that idea into reality was not easy. Bardeen spent long hours thinking about how to control current, using tiny wires and precise circuits, while Breton analyzed every electronic reaction, searching for the perfect form of the chip. Shockley, often seen as intense and impatient, kept pushing the team for tangible results, challenging anyone who dared to say the idea was impossible. Then came December 1947, after months of effort and continuous experiments, when the world witnessed the birth of the first transistor. It was not merely an invention, it was a triumph of the human mind over the impossible, a moment that proved how cooperation between different minds, even conflicting ones, could ignite a scientific revolution. But success also brought new conflicts. After the transistor's creation, disputes began over credit and recognition, and the team eventually split apart. Shockley became more commercially driven, while Bardeen and Bratton chose to focus on research and development. These tensions, though painful, helped push technology forward, as each scientist went on to create new companies and projects that paved the way for modern electronics and the birth of Silicon Valley. This part of the story shows that invention is never born in isolation. It is the fruit of intellectual struggle, collaboration, and perseverance. The tension between geniuses themselves became the fuel that ignited the technological revolution. And to this day, whenever you look at any electronic device in your hand, remember that every screen, every processor, every application traces its roots back to the cooperation and conflict of three brilliant scientific minds, minds that taught humanity one timeless lesson: great minds may differ, but together, they can change the entire world. The silent revolution, from the laboratory to the world. The 1950s, after the first transistor emerged from Bell Laboratories, humanity began to witness a silent revolution, one that was never announced in the media, nor celebrated in breaking news headlines, yet it began changing the world from the inside out. In the 1950s, the radio was one of the most important means of communication and entertainment at home. The devices were large and heavy. Their vacuum tubes heated up quickly, consumed enormous amounts of power, and at any moment, the danger of burning or failure threatened the listeners. Then came the transistor, a tiny miracle, a small piece of silicon that turned dreams into tangible reality. Radio sets that once filled entire rooms became the size of a human hand, consumed less power, were more durable, and far more precise in receiving signals. The beginning was slow, for people did not immediately grasp the power of this invention. Scientists and companies started experimenting with transistors in small applications, portable radios, measuring instruments, and early computers. Each successful experiment was another thread connecting the transistor to the real world. At this stage, the influence of the transistor began to appear clearly in both military and civilian communications. Communication centers no longer needed rooms filled with huge machines. They could now rely on smaller, more efficient units. And so, electronics began to move from the laboratories of geniuses into the everyday lives of people, quietly and without media noise. as if a great revolution were unfolding in silence. But the road was not easy. The major companies were cautious. The transistor was new, and manufacturing it required extremely delicate skills. Yet every failure led to improvement, and every success ignited a spark of confidence that the future could indeed be changed. In other laboratories, experiments began to show that the transistor could become the heart of every digital device in the future. Scientists realized that this was not a small invention. It was the key to the coming information age. Every electron moving through a slice of silicon, every current passing between the positive and negative sides, was writing the first lines of a new chapter in human history. And so, in silence, the revolution began. People would not hear of it for years, until portable radios reached their hands, and early computers in university labs began to demonstrate the power of the transistor. It became the hidden pulse linking science and reality, the laboratory and the home, ideas and people. And every time we touch a small device, press a button, or listen to a voice through a speaker, we must remember that all of this began in a narrow room filled with vacuum tubes, driven by minds hungry for innovation. From that humble place, the transistor emerged, silent, steady, and powerful, to change the world quietly, long before the revolution became loud and undeniable in the decades that followed. Silicon Valley. The dream begins the 1960s. At the dawn of the 1960s, the world began to realize that the transistor was not merely an invention, but a gateway to a new era. In the heart of California, along the shores of San Francisco, there was a small region that carried within it a great dream, Silicon Valley. William Shockley, one of the three inventors of the transistor, had a clear vision. He wanted to make electronics a tool for everyone, not just for laboratories or armies. Yet he was not alone. Around him gathered a team of young engineers. Their ambition far exceeded their age, their visions transcended all limits, and their hearts blazed with passion and imagination. The challenge was immense, to transform the transistor from a single, separate component into integrated circuits, a single chip capable of containing dozens, then hundreds, and soon thousands of tiny transistors, able to perform the same operations that once required entire rooms filled with vacuum tubes. In Shockley's laboratories, a unique experiment began to take shape. Each engineer left his personal touch, a new design here, a modification to the silicon material there, a search for a way to reduce errors and increase the speed of the circuits. The process resembled weaving invisible threads that moved among the electrons, until the computer of the future was born within a small chip no larger than the palm of a hand. But the road was not paved with roses. Shockley was extremely strict, often stirring tension among his team. Some engineers felt that their ideas were being suppressed, their dreams crushed beneath the weight of discipline. Yet that very strict environment, despite its difficulty, was the engine of innovation. It forced everyone to think differently, to break old constraints, and to push the boundaries of what was possible. While Shockley focused on quality control and manufacturing, the rebellious engineers gradually drifted away from him to found their own companies, the first sparks of the modern electronics industry in Silicon Valley. These small startups, which began as personal dreams, soon turned into the pillars of global technology, companies that produced microprocessors, computers, and the software of the future. Silicon Valley became more than just a place on a map. It became a symbol of human innovation and of the minds that refused to accept limitations. Every silicon chip, every integrated circuit that emerged from that valley carried within it collective genius, unbreakable will, and a dream that technology could change human life forever. And thus, the revolution began to move from silent laboratories into the real world, from a few experimental devices to personal computers, from an idea to an entire industry that would change the course of humanity forever. The birth of the personal computer, the 1970s and 1980s. As the 1970s arrived, the great dream of Silicon Valley was beginning to take shape. Yet the world had not fully realized the scale of the coming transformation. The transistor was no longer just a tiny component on a chip. It had become the heart of small computers, machines that could fit on a desk, or even in a small home office. During this period, microprocessors emerged, integrating hundreds, then thousands of transistors into a single, compact circuit capable of performing calculations at astonishing speeds. Suddenly, it became possible to build a personal computer, a device that anyone could own, capable of thinking faster than the giant machines that once filled entire rooms back in the 1950s. Companies like Intel and Apple began to see the golden opportunity. Ambitious engineers, driven by grand dreams, invented the first personal computers and started to place the world firmly on the path of digital transformation. The goal was clear: to make technology accessible to everyone. Computers were no longer reserved for universities or military laboratories. They became tools for anyone who wished to write, calculate, or create. The challenges, however, were far from simple. Each new chip required precise design, countless experiments, and endless verification to ensure that the tiny transistors would not fail under pressure. But this was the world of innovation, where every failure was a step towards success, and every mistake was a lesson in improving performance and speed. As the 1980s began, personal computers spread rapidly through schools, offices, and homes. Children began learning programming, young people started developing games, and the entire world began to feel the profound impact of the transistor in every corner of daily life. This era was not merely a technological advancement, it was a social and cultural revolution. The small transistor, discovered in a narrow laboratory in the 1940s, had now become the driving force behind a transformation in how humans think, work, and communicate. The personal computer became humanity's window to the future, a window no one could have imagined only a few decades earlier. And all of it was made possible by three key pillars: innovation, precise design, and the brilliant minds that refuse to surrender to limitations. Every time we open a device, write a document, or play a game, we should remember that the journey of the transistor did not begin in stores or offices, but in a small laboratory where scientists turned their dream into a reality that forever changed the course of human history. The Internet and the Great Connection. The 1990s. As the 1990s arrived, humanity began to witness an invisible evolution, one of immense and lasting impact. The transistor was no longer just the cornerstone of personal computers, it had become the electric pulse that connected the entire world. In this decade, the Internet began to weave itself into daily life. Computers, once isolated devices in homes or offices, became gateways to a fully interconnected world. Every email, every web page, every voice call over the network depended on millions of tiny transistors working tirelessly within the heart of processors, transmitting information at nearly the speed of light. Imagine this, a small device on your desk capable of connecting thousands of computers across the globe, all thanks to a silicon chip containing millions of transistors. The speed and precision provided by these chips represented a monumental leap forward compared to the era of vacuum tubes, when computers required entire rooms just to perform simple operations. Major corporations and small inventors alike raced to bring the Internet into people's lives. Schools, universities, offices, and eventually homes became equipped with access to the World Wide Web. The transistor was no longer merely an electronic component. It had become a gateway to a new culture, a bridge for the boundless exchange of knowledge. This era witnessed the birth of digital culture, video games, email, the first web pages, and the rise of startup companies that would later grow into global technology giants. None of this could have been possible without the transistor, the tiny heart driving the flow of information every single moment. Yet with all this progress, scientists began to realize the limits of the traditional transistor. The greater the demand for speed, the stronger the need became to create smaller, more efficient circuits, capable of handling the immense pressure of ever-increasing data flow. This marked the beginning of the great challenges that the industry would face in the following decade, but also the dawn of a new age of human creativity. And today, each time we connect to the internet, send a message, or watch a video, we must remember that it all began in small, crowded laboratories, where three brilliant minds once changed the world forever. The transistor was not merely an invention. It was the gateway to a connected world, where knowledge and everyday life moved to the rhythm of tiny electrons flowing through the delicate paths of silicon chips. The age of smartphones and digital intelligence, the new millennium. With the dawn of the new millennium, the world entered a stage of no return. The transistor, that tiny invention born in a cramped laboratory, had now become the heart of every portable device, every smartphone, and every small computer resting in human hands. During this period, smartphones began to emerge, first as luxury items, then as essential tools of daily life. Each device contained billions of microscopic transistors, working tirelessly, turning every touch on the screen into digital signals, every operation into data, and every idea into tangible action. The microprocessors within these phones were more powerful than the computers that once filled entire rooms in the 1950s and 1960s. The transistor was no longer just a tool for numerical calculation. It had become the engine of the modern digital world, powering games, social media, educational applications, and even the control systems of smart homes. With this expansion came the first steps of digital intelligence. Data began to flow endlessly, and smartphones started to learn from their users, offering suggestions, predicting actions, and interacting in ways that felt almost human. All these capabilities relied on a complex network of tiny transistors, organizing information at breathtaking speed, translating it into actions that seamlessly fit into our daily lives. The transistor had become more than just a technological component. It had become the lifeblood of the digital era. Every message, every call, every game, every application on your phone depends on it. It has become a part of our identity, a silent force that governs our digital world. Yet, with all this power, new challenges began to emerge. As transistors grew smaller and more densely packed into chips, classical physics reached its limits. Scientists and engineers began to wonder, how can we sustain this pace of progress? How can the transistor continue to lead the digital revolution without losing speed or innovation? This era proved that the transistor is not merely an invention, but a never-ending journey of human creativity, and that every smartphone we hold today stands as a testament to humanity's ability to turn a small idea into a global force. And each time we open our phones, send a message, or watch a video, we must remember that the journey of this device began decades ago in a narrow laboratory, and that the transistor has always been the silent mind guiding the world toward the future. The final frontiers, Moore's law stumbled 01020. With the arrival of the second decade of the new millennium, humanity began to face the first signs of the limits of the classical transistor. For 50 years, a principle known as Moore's law had prevailed. The density of transistors on chips doubled roughly every 2 years, continuously increasing the power and speed of computers. Yet during this era, physical obstacles began to emerge. The smaller the scientists made the transistors, the closer they approached the limits of the atoms themselves. Electrons began to tunnel through barriers once firmly contained by the chips, and controlling current became more difficult, as if the material itself refused to continue along the same path. Intel and other industry giants announced that the pace of processor advancement had slowed. It was no longer possible to rely on simply scaling up chip power as in the past. Innovation now required new ideas and revolutionary technologies, not merely shrinking the transistor further. During this period, scientists began exploring unconventional solutions. The quantum transistor, where electrons could behave according to the principles of quantum mechanics, and embedded artificial intelligence within chips, where the device became more than a processor, becoming a digital mind capable of learning. The scene resembled a steep mountain path. The road the transistor had traveled for 7 decades now faced a harsh descent, demanding true creativity and science fiction-level imagination. Some began to dream of computers that could surpass the limits of classical physics, while others focused on reducing power consumption and improving efficiency rather than merely increasing speed. This decade revealed that the transistor was no longer just a tool. It had become a continuous challenge for humanity. How could we harness this small mind that had changed the world to overcome the limits of nature itself? How could we ensure the digital revolution continues in a world that demands smarter, more innovative solutions than ever before? And every time we think of today's phones, computers, and AI devices, we must remember that the journey of the transistor has never stopped since that first spark in Bell Laboratories, and that even in moments of slowing progress, the human mind remains the engine that will continue to redefine the future. The future. When Silicon thinks 2025 and beyond, by the year 2025, the world had entered a new stage of the technological revolution. The transistor, which began as a small piece of germanium in a cramped laboratory in 1947, was no longer merely an electronic component. It had become the silent mind behind all the smart devices around us. In this era, computers and phones were no longer just tools for calculation and communication. They had become connected, intelligent networks capable of learning, predicting, and interacting. Every AI application, every robot, every data analysis system relied on millions, even billions of tiny transistors, forming the heart of modern processors. But the path to this point had not been easy. The limits of physics and the atomic scale size of transistors forced scientists to invent new ways to harness quantum mechanics and to design hybrid processors that combine traditional power with quantum efficiency. This shift marks the beginning of a new era in computing, where machines can perform complex operations at speeds no one could have imagined decades ago. The transistor was no longer just a tool. It had become the digital pulse of daily life, from smartphones, self-driving cars, and assistive robots, to smart homes that anticipate the needs of their occupants before they even think of them. All of this was made possible by the same small chip that began its journey more than 70 years ago in Bell Laboratories. In this era, one lesson is clear: human innovation never stops. From vacuum tubes, to the germanium transistor, to silicon chips, and now to quantum computing, each step demonstrated humanity's ability to transform a small idea into a global force that changes the lives of millions. Today, as we live in a fully connected world, we must remember that every advance began with a simple idea, a curious mind, and the determination to surpass the impossible. The transistor is not just an invention. It is an ongoing story of humans turning energy, light, and electrons into a connected, intelligent world capable of thinking in ways that were unimaginable 70 years ago. And thus, our journey concludes, from the spark in the dark in 1947 to a future where silicon thinks, a future that tests the limits of human imagination, a future that proves once again that it is the minds capable of innovation that change the world forever. Measuring time and progress. The transistor between past and present. If we travel back to the 1940s, we would see the first transistors, small devices, yet enormous by the standards of that era. These transistors were much larger than a grain of sand, requiring vast laboratories to manufacture them, and each processor contained only a limited number, barely capable of performing simple calculations compared to what we do today. Imagine the first electronic general-purpose computer, the ENIAC, and filled an entire large room. This computer could perform basic calculations that would take minutes or even hours. Today, a single silicon chip no larger than a grain of sand contains billions of transistors, capable of performing millions of calculations per second. Let us consider a practical example. The first personal computers 1970-1980 were slow, large, and had minimal memory, sufficient only for storing small texts and limited programs. A smartphone today contains a processor with billions of transistors, processing power that far exceeds the massive computers of the 1970s, capable of running multiple applications, 3D games, and real-time internet communication simultaneously. The difference is not just size or speed, but energy efficiency and integration. Early computers required entire rooms for cooling and consumed millions of watts, while today's smartphone performs the same operations using a tiny fraction of that energy, remaining almost completely cool. This progress highlights the power of human innovation. The transistor is no longer just an electronic component. It has become the foundation of the modern information age, a tool that enables every individual in the world to access computing power that was once confined to military labs and major universities. In the end, if we want to measure its impact, every touch on your phone today is the result of 70 years of continuous innovation, from the first vacuum tube to a silicon chip containing billions of transistors, a story reflecting humanity's journey from experimentation and research to mastering technology and making it an inseparable part of daily life.